Police officers of Reddit, who's the smartest criminal you've ever encountered? Most of them are really stupid, so this guy isn't a criminal mastermind, but here goes. He wanted to rob a jeweler's on our city's main street. So he found out the flat beside the jeweler's was empty, and he hid there. For 2 weeks he triggered the alarm on purpose several times a night. Massive headache for the police and the business. We turned up to see nothing there. Nothing on cameras. Thought it was just a fluke, so the jewelers turned off the alarm system and said they'd wait until the morning to get a new one installed, or that one rewired, because something wasn't right. As soon as he heard that, and the police leaving, he tore down the wall. Had already been working on this apparently, and robbed the place taking his sweet time. Escaped without anyone noticing anything for hours. Until the jewelers came back in the morning. Then he tried to resell something he stole which had a serial number on it and got caught. So not that smart after all. Good effort though. He did all the hard work pretty well. AIDK, the hardest part about stealing high dollar goods is selling the merch. Well, there was this one guy, we'll call him Jack. Now, Jack stole stuff, but also involved a lot of people. One time, he was planning to steal a whole bunch of cars. All luxury cars. So what he did was he got his people to call 911 etc. from all different places and countries to tell them that car theft was taking place in multiple places. Oh, he also only used a few people each time, so it was different voices, people, locations, etc. So the police went each time until he actually did the crime. Then no one came. He was never caught. When the owner of those cars came, the police didn't believe him. Semicolon. 10/10ths genius right there. He sort of used the boy who cried wolf story in real life to his advantage. The damn wolf learned to cry wolf. A friend of my brother moved to Israel where for a period of time it was / acceptable to drive with an American driver's license. He was pulled over for speeding, and when asked for his license, gave the officer his Costco card. Costco is a membership-based retail warehouse in the US and a few other countries. The exchange apparently went something like this. Officer, Costco? What is Costco? Friend. It's the state I'm from. Officer, that sounds made up. Friend. There are lots of states you probably haven't heard of. Have you heard of Arkansas? How about Idaho? Officer, I guess not. Friend. Well, I'm from the small state of Costco. The officer didn't have a response and wound up writing the ticket to someone with a Costco driver's license. Friend framed the ticket and still has it hanging on his wall. Reminds me of a family friend of mine. Very funny Australian with an absolutely horrendous Boggan accent. Well, late 80s he's driving through Texas and runs a red light, and is immediately pulled over by a 250-pound Texan police officer with an equally horrendous accent. The way the story goes, this man is obviously not the brightest chapter. So our friend, when asked about running the red light, gets very apologetic, and explains that he gets easily confused, because in Australia you know how things are veer down there, red means go, and green means stop. The cop actually let this man go with a warning. I did not know that. Well, in America, red means stop, so don't make this mistake again. Literally sounds like a bit from The Simpsons. Hilarious. That's German for the Bart. The. How do you remember how many underscores are in your name? I don't, and I never want to. The story goes like this. A homie Arwana walks out one morning to drive to work, only to find his car missing. He reports the car stolen to police. A few days later, his car is sitting back in front of his house. When he gets inside he finds a note. It was an apology that said the thief was in dire need of quick transportation, and so he borrowed the first car he found with the keys inside. The writer noticed the sticker on the car for the local sports team, and just so there were no hard feelings, he left 4 tickets to an upcoming game in the glove box for the homie Arwana and his family. So the homie Arwana and his family attend the game. But when they return home they find the house has been ransacked, and all items of value are gone. In Europe right now there is a serious burglary of professional football players during game nights. Rob Gronkowski's house was burgled last year while he was playing in the Super Bowl. Rob Gronkowski, don't mind if I do. Homeless guy in my hometown figured out if he committed some act of petty theft he'd get a night in jail, a warm place to sleep, and a hot meal. He'd show up, turn in his stolen goods, and that would be that. After a while the police would just tell him to take back whatever he stole the next day. Quite the town character. Lots of people try to get arrested on purpose for the same reason. I've done it before. To try to escape an abusive relationship. FYI, trying to get arrested is super fun. I hope you are able to get out of the abusive relationship. What all did you do to get arrested? Murder. Works every time. There was a guy with over 50 speeding charges, with the name Proro Jazdy. He was in a different car, with a different disguise every single time. Eventually, after the government set up a special task force to take down this guy, they realized that Proro Jazdy means driver's license in Polish. Clarification. It was 50 different people. The police just wrote down their name as Proro Jazdy every time someone with a Polish driver's license was caught speeding. I suspect he might be an associate of someone that goes by Hermano. There's a small tourist town where I grew up that is divided in half by a big river. The only way between the two sides is over a long bridge, unless you go all the way around another mountain pass. These guys called in, like, 2 to 3 bomb threats to a posh hotel on one side of the bridge. I think they even left some dummy packages. All the police went across the bridge to do crowd control, etc., etc. The guys then called in a bomb threat on the bridge, and started robbing stuff on the other side. The police couldn't be positive the bomb threat was real or not, and hesitated long enough to give the thieves a head start. I first heard this story about 10 years ago, in Banff, Alberta. Never bothered to look up what was real versus what is invented. I think this is pretty close, but as my father used to say, you can't let truth get in the way of a good story. Wow. 24k upvotes. Thanks folks. If it was my town I'd put police stations on both sides, but that would probably cost more money than they have. Then I would only let people cross if their lord promised to marry one of my daughters. What if their lord married somebody else after promising? Then you should defend your honor through stabbery. But what if they said mayhaps? Working in a home improvement store when younger, this guy came in, went to the snow blowers, took one and went to the return desk, said he wanted to return it, but had no receipt. They told him you need a receipt, so he says, okay, I'll be back, and wheels it off to car through the front door. He did this a few times apparently. Couple places even helped him load it back into his car. Had a guy try that with the big expensive bedding sets at Sears back 20 years ago. He came up the escalator empty-handed, walked into the first aisle, and came out carrying the set. He said he wanted to return it. I said I needed a receipt, and when he asked why, I explained, well, sometimes we have issues with people coming up here, taking stuff off the shelves, and trying to return it. He got a bit squirrely, looked around kinda panicked, and left with it. On the way to the door, security started following him, so he threw it at them, and sprinted out the door. On the way to the door, security started following him, so he threw it at them, and sprinted out the door. Dead lol. A French thief who spent 10 years in prison became a comedian when he got out. One of his stories: finds a building, goes in, chooses a floor, and transforms the exit door into an extra apartment. Puts the apartment number, fake lock, welcome rug, etc. Puts an iPhone for sale. The person comes to buy it. He opens the door in a shower robe and says, give me 1 second. Him just gonna count the money, and poof, he's gone from the exit stairs. This seems like exactly the kind of crime a comedian would commit. Learns about smartest criminals, becomes smartest criminal himself. The smartest criminals are the ones the cops don't know about. Because they are the cops. A film by Quentin Tarantino. Obligatory not a cop, but close on 20 years ago now, a guy on Australia's Gold Coast got away with a bank robbery in broad daylight. He cased the bank for a while and discovered a pattern of the bank manager arriving about 30 minutes before anyone else each morning, where he would leave the front doors unlocked so staff could help themselves in without a key or needing to wait for the boss to come and let them in. One morning the crook dressed himself up for a busy day of office work and waited for the bank manager to arrive. As the manager was unlocking the doors, he made his move, entering the building and threatening the manager with a gun. He got all the details he'd need to access the vault and so forth, and then tied the manager up and stuffed him in his office. When the staff arrived, he told them that the manager had called in sick and that regional office had sent him in to do the open shop thing, and no one batted an eyelid. This bank had a small walk-in vault that normally only held about 50k on any given day, but old mate had timed his robbery for the morning after business banking day, when all the local small businesses would make their end of week deposits, and reportedly got a score of close to 250k. Once the vault was open, he pulled his gun out and invited all the staff to enter the vault and locked them in. By this stage the bank was due to be open, so when he went to leave there were a number of customers waiting to get inside to do their banking. He told them all that there had been an issue with the computers, and that the tech team had estimated it would take about 30 minutes before the issue would be resolved, and that they couldn't open until then. Then he got into his car and drove straight to the airport, and flew to Hong Kong and then disappeared. To my knowledge, the cops never caught him, and never managed to find the money. They knew he'd have had to leave most of it in Australia somewhere, because you can only take 10k odd in cash and any currency out of the country before customs pulls you into their interview rooms. So the assumption was that he had to have an accomplice here who would funnel the money to him slowly over time. That's a lot of trust to put in one person who's in another country from you, and with leverage over you. It'd be really smart in this situation to use an immigrant from Hong Kong to funnel the money back. Ideally an immigrant with family back in Hong Kong. Funnel the payments as sending money to your family back home, which is super common anyways. The thief gives a percentage to the family or maintains their lifestyle in exchange for the transfers. Now the funneler has leverage over the thief in the form of his known whereabouts. The thief has leverage over the funneler by taking care of the latter's family. Mutually assured destruction if either ever flips. This guy funnels money. Plot twist. He's the accomplice. Here's one. I knew this guy back in the early 80s. Let's call him Jim. Well, he really wanted this high-powered super bike, but he knew he couldn't ever afford it. So what he did was to take drive to London and scout it about for a few days until he found that particular model parked outside a house. He goes back that night with a Slidder Hummer, pulls the lock, and steals the bike. He gets it home, puts it in his garage, and completely strips it, so that the only thing left is the frame and the bottom half of the engine, which he drags into the weeds at the bottom of his garden. Then he pours fuel over it, and burns it a bit. A few weeks pass, and weeds have started growing over it. It's at that point he calls the cops and reports that someone had dumped a bike frame in his garden. The cops show up, and he explains that he'd just got back from being away and found it. The cops take the frame and note down high name and address. A few days later, the cops call him and say that the bike had been stolen from London a month or so ago, from the serial number on the bottom half of the engine and frame, and that the insurance company had classed the bike as a write-off, and had told the cops to dispose of it. Now, because the frame was found in his garden and the insurance company didn't want it, the cops were duty-bound to ask him if he wanted to keep it, or if they should throw it. So he tells them that he'd always wanted to build a bike. He gets the frame back from them, repaints it, then puts it all back together, and re-registers it as a Q-Reg, stolen and recovered. I forgot to call him Jim, didn't I? I always laugh when somebody names a character, and then proceeds to never use the name. Nice catch. I laughed too. I was gonna read back and check because I wasn't paying attention, but then I didn't. Not a police officer, but I once dealt with a criminal who forged court documents facilitating his own release from prison. Reality, the law can be anything I want. Not a policeman here, but I have a nice story from insurance/debt collectors. There was this guy who was already in heaps of debt, like more than a lifetime's worth of debt. He proceeded to file several police reports for identity theft up to the point that he got protected from financial checkups. It was a temporary measure that were given to repeated identity theft victims. At the same time, he had reported fake income to the IRS for the last couple of years to between 40 to 60 millions depending on the year. That's a good way to finance emigrating out of a third world country. When I was 18 and going through a tough time, my old coworker told me to open a line of credit with my dad's SSN, buy a bunch of iPads, sell them fast, and move to Argentina. How was Argentina? Not up but Argentine here, right now, not good. Probably someone who committed a crime I never solved. With that being said, I had a guy use a sledgehammer to smash his way through a wall at a Best Buy and steal a bunch of phones and cameras. He was smart enough to wear gloves and a face mask and not touch anything he didn't have to. Alarms didn't go off until he exited out the back door, which the alarm company gets after a minute or two and takes them like 3/4 minutes to call into us, giving him a good 5-minute head start. So he was probably a few miles away before we got dispatched to it. He clearly scoped out the area before doing his deed too. Smart dude. I just keep thinking about Sledge from Rainbow Six Siege. A guy, let's call him Dave, I worked with told this story. He was working at a Mercedes dealership. He was sitting at his desk when this well-dressed gentleman comes in and asks if he could test drive a specific car that was parked out front. It was also a busy day. Usually they are allowed to let people test drive by themselves after they have taken some form of a deposit or something. Maybe the official ID or something. Not really relevant. So Dave gives out the keys. The guy goes on his test drive and comes back a reasonable amount of time later. He walks in and hands off the key, gets his deposit / whatever back. This was about closing time, even possibly on a Friday. Everything is in order. Fast forward to the next business day. Dave's boss walks in and realizes that one of the Mercedes out front is gone. Dave has to explain that the car was returned and that they have the key and everything. Turns out the criminal didn't test drive. He drove somewhere to create a replica of the key and gave that replica back to the desk. He kept the real key. That smart son of a bitch. This seems like a pretty major security flaw. All you need is a fake ID or even a stolen ID and hope they don't look too closely at the pic, which they probably won't. Most dealers will just throw you the keys. The only way to stop test drive thefts is to not allow test drives. As long as it doesn't happen too often, it's probably worth the risk for the dealers to get customers in the cars. A lot of dealers insist on riding with you when you test drive. Also gives them a chance to sell you on the car. Pretty sure that would prevent this. It's not rocket science. Some places give 24-hour test drives or longer, although I've never bought new, so I've always driven with the salesperson. I'll never do a 24-hour test drive again. Damn salesperson complained about my homemade mac and cheese. Wouldn't let me change the TV channel, and hogged all the blankets, and the whole time he wouldn't shut up about the car. Not a police officer, but was in ramming college. My university owned all the houses adjacent to campus. These were unlike dorms, with RAS and the same rules, which included a very strict no alcohol policy. It was a privilege to live in the houses, and priority was given to upperclassmen who were more likely to bend that rule because they were of age, and it was harder to police off campus in houses. There was a student who went around knocking on doors saying something like "I'm on rap" and "housing director's name sent me for health and wellness checks." She'd find their booze, take it, and follow up with how she's doing them a favor by just giving them a warning. She wasn't actually in rap and was just keeping the booze for herself. The only reason she got found out was because she did it to an actual rap. The rap was male. They kept men and women housing separate and just assumed he didn't know her because of that. It was only later he questioned why they had a female doing wellness checks on male housing. They did an investigation and asked other residents. Incidents dated back previous 2 years. Never found out who it was. Haha. My buddies and I did this to the freshmen when we were upperclassmen in college. The look on their scared little faces was priceless. Just carry a clipboard and a keyring / carabiner and no one asked questions. Same thing as the computer rooms. Guys would cut the power to electrical stations, damage the wiring, then hide waiting for the cops to show up. Once the owners of the buildings came, they would shut off the power because of the unsafe wiring that would have to be repaired in the morning. Everyone would leave for the night, then would cut away all the non-powered wiring to get the copper removed. I have a friend who is no longer a criminal, but committed crimes for about 15 years and never got arrested or even investigated. Some of his highlights: growing weed in a shed on his neighbor's property. The neighbor was old and never left the house. Buying a building under a fake name, taking out huge loans against it, getting HUD money, and burning it all down. Sold fake raffle tickets to raffle off stuff he never had and never raffled. I can't remember how many times he pulled that scam, but he bought a new car with the money. He moved a bunch of times because people would suspect him of being a con man. His dad was in jail for similar stuff, but he was never even questioned by the police about anything. Now he has a family and a normal job. Semicolon. 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 Now he has a family and a normal job. Semicolon. His finest con yet. Semicolon. He's playing the long con, probably working up to conning Social Security. This was in the late 90s - early zeros. A guy in my dorm came to school solely to deal drugs. He took out student loans, registered for a bunch of 300-person freshman survey courses where he would never be missed, then literally never went to class. All he did was go to raves and concerts and keggers and sell party drugs. After the first semester, he was suspended. He wrote the usual "I was young and dumb and in over my head" sob story, and got put on probation for a semester, so he had a repeat of the fall. At the end of the year, he was kicked out, and didn't care. He made something on the order of $150K in return for about $8K in student loans to cover a year of housing and tuition. So far as I know, he was never caught. It may have been a short-sighted maneuver in the long run, but in the short run it seemed fairly genius to effectively use federal loans to start your drug business. He should have played the long con, cash out the $150k, apply to another school with the understanding he would pay cash, live somewhat frugally so the cash lasts, and use his story from the first school for his thesis to get his master's. But wouldn't they see his transcripts from the place he failed out of? Worked at a jail. After getting off work, I watched an ex-inmate, homeless, being released. He walked over to a patrol car, looked me in the eye, and he elbowed the window in. He was walked back to the entrance and rebooked in. It was middle of January. He didn't want to get too cold. This is sad as hell. R/shattering dystopia. Not a cop. There was an incident in Fargo ND where a guy wanted to steal electronics equipment. The store had plenty of alarms on it, and generally cutting an alarm triggers an alarm, so instead he cut all the alarms. This was before cell phones were really widespread and alarms were usually just connected to the phone line. He found an access point to one of the phone company's big trunk lines. Correction. 9 access points. Massive thick copper cables with tens of thousands of lines running through them. He cut through the whole thing with a circular saw, knocked out phone service to most of the town, and robbed an audio store during the ensuing chaos. There were no leads until a tip came in from another town, where he'd pulled something similar. They hadn't been able to pin that to him, but had strong suspicions and he'd relocated to Fargo, so the cops pay him a visit. He refused to let them in, because they didn't have a warrant, so the cops left to get one without leaving anyone to watch him and he split. When they came back they found the saw coated in copper dust and a lot of the stolen stuff. He was in the wind for a while, but even after he got caught he had another card to play. While being transported between prisons he used a key he'd made to unlock his shackles, and climbed out the roof vent of the bus. I remember getting into a festival, and seeing a magician guy do tricks on the people searching him to distract them from the drugs he had on him. Spectacular show. And I'm sure he made good profit. If the police officers knew, they'd be talking about it on here, but I doubt it. You raise a good point. Nobody described in this thread is actually the smartest criminal. The truly smart ones like that magician never get caught. I heard about one person that pulled a shoplifting scam on a large, popular and well-known US retail store. They walked in with some cheap nylon product. To get one of those I walked in with this stickers they used to put on returning merchandise. The sticker easily peeled off the product and damaged. They walked to the electronics department, grabbed an expensive box off the shelf, and went to customer service. They placed the sticker on the big box, and asked if they could return the item without a receipt. Unfortunately, no, not without the original receipt. Dang it. And they walk out. Customer service even gave the doorman the thumbs up, having just interacted with the customer. This took place before widespread inventory controls, and cameras absolutely everywhere. I feel like I would remember what I had and hadn't recently put a sticker on. But perhaps I wouldn't be getting paid enough to worry too much about it. Not a copper, but this was pretty smart. I used to run bars at a number of venues around the north of England, one of which was Chester at a course. Usually, we'd just have to keep an eye out for scousers trying to nick drinks or sneak in without paying. And with it being so close to Liverpool there was a fair amount of security on site. You could tell them, as they'd be suited, booted, a high-vis waistcoat on, and usually carrying a radio. Now there were a dozen or so bars dotted around the course. And you can imagine the amount of money that was taken from 100,000 or so punters drinking steadily from 11 until 8 or 9 in the evening. So every hour or so, the security would go round the bars in turn, and take all the high denomination notes from each till and stick them in the safe in the main building. So I'm stood there one day, pulling pints doing the barman thing. The security blokes have been round a few times and it's getting steadily busier. Then one bloke shows up on his own, high-vis on and radio in his hand, does the till, leaving the usual receipt, so we can balance up at the end of the meeting. Bit early I think. But hey ho, I've got plenty to do. Then 10 minutes or so later, 2 more blokes show up, dressed the same. "Oh, your mate's just been here," I said. "No need to touch that just yet." "What mate? We are the only 2 doing this duty today." Cue a rapid fire and increasingly panicked exchange over the radio. Matey boy who'd done the till before used to work there apparently. So he knew the drill and he'd been watching the guards, and knew just when to time it, and what order they were going round the bars in. Apparently he got round 9 or 10, before he decided not to push his luck any further, and walked away with about 80 grand we heard later. Just took off the high-vis, dumped that in the radio and he's just one more guy in a suit in a crowd of thousands. They were a bit stricter on the procedure after that. Closed bracket. If they knew he used to work as security, couldn't they find out who he is, and you'd be able to identify him? I worked with this one guy who had a lengthy record. He had a system for getting released if he got caught after committing a crime. If the police were in pursuit and he knew he was about to be cornered, he would act insane. His girl would play along with it, telling the police that he was off his medication. The police would arrest him, but then send him to a mental ward with papers instructing the ward to release to police once he was cleared. Once he was in the mental ward, he would cause a distraction that would make the person attending the desk with the file cabinet to leave said cabinet. He would then crawl to the file cabinet, look for his release to police papers, and then would literally eat the papers. When the psych evaluators decided that he was stable enough to be released, there would be no instructions to send him to the police, and he would be released to the general public. He did this about 10 times until police officers noticed him back on the streets. This stunt forced the state to change their procedure for detaining mentally unstable suspects. What state was this? Also, instead of eating it, why didn't he just flush it down the toilet? I'm not sure. I didn't feel like it was my place to question a convicted felon on his paper disposal tactics. There's one guy I recently dealt with who is on parole. I stopped him in my city after he was looking to buy drugs. Usually people come from all over to buy drugs and then leave. I issue him a warning and let him go, as it's pretty common, and he sang like a bird regarding the people he was trying to buy from. Anyway, the next day, I got a call from his parole officer who says he was alerted the guy was pulled over and wanted to verify that it was his guy that I stopped. I'm a little confused at first, but he goes on to say that the day before, he was scheduled to meet with him, but he had an excuse and bailed. His excuse was that he was in the hospital. Well, when he spoke with him the following day, he was able to provide documentation that he had entered the hospital day 1 and had left day 2. Well, I had stopped him at 1:15 in the morning, and after looking at the picture, it was 100% him. Turns out the guy had checked in and out of the hospital on day 1, then in and out again on day 2. He then rearranged half the paperwork to make it look like he was in the hospital overnight, which would make my car stop of him appear like I mixed him up with someone else, as well as give him a valid excuse to miss their meeting. Not sure what's gonna happen to that guy, but I thought it was pretty clever. I remember an officer telling me about a B&D alarm he and his team responded to. No one was there to report the alarm. It must have been a security monitoring company that called. When police showed up, everything seemed normal. Most lights were off, and there was an employee still working. Explains he was there working late and must have set off an alarm. They almost believed him until he said UHH before saying the name of the company he worked for. After that it was downhill, but with a little more research he would have pretty much gotten away with it. I don't care how long I've been working for a company, I'd probably still say I with my numbers too. I'll be sure not to loiter around any crime scenes now. My favorite was the guy who stole a post office mailbox off the street, repainted it, and then put it next to the night deposit box at a bank, and hung an out of order sign on the deposit box. All the businesses came along and dropped off their deposits in the mailbox. There's a golf course / country club in my town that has a PGA tournament scheduled in the next couple years. They have a guy repeatedly breaking in overnight and just lounging around and eating food, all on camera. The club refuses to report it, so they don't hurt their chances of the tournament coming. Like some kinda movie comedy plot. Chaotic neutral.